Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am stoked. We got Matt rejoining us, we got Oak rejoining us, we got Craig rejoining us, Sean, of course, and myself, and I am pumped for this. Now, while I am pumped, y'all should be too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. Let's get into some intros. Actually, before we get into intros, if anybody has any thoughts or questions while we're going, by all means, put them up in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show and get right into it. So we're going to be talking trust today. But before we start talking that, Matt, why don't you hit me up? 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
Hey, Matt Barnett, Columbus, Texas, running Bonetti Explosives and loving life and blowing stuff up.
Bam. No better life indeed. Oak, how about yourself?
Yeah, I live in Daytona Beach, Florida, and really right now just a keynote speaker going around talking at conferences and to companies about leadership and success.
Bam. Another great way to spend life. Craig, how about yourself?
Craig Weller, former Navy SWCC and co-founder of Building the Elite, which is a coaching company that trains people for special operations.
Bam. All you guys are so succinct today. I'm loving this. Sean, how's life out in the mountains?
Things are good. How about that for succinct?
Bam. He's rocking it right off the bat. So today we're talking trust, and not only just the system of trust, but like what happens to build it, how do we get into it, all that good stuff. So let's get some first thoughts on it. Oak, I'm going to hit you with this first because you were the one that came up with this idea. What were your first thoughts? Trust, rebuilding trust, losing it, all that good stuff.
Yeah, as I go around talking to companies and organizations and just living life here in America, I mean, it's very clear that trust is at an all-time low, at least in my lifetime, here in America, in every aspect of life, whether it's business, the military, our government, personal relationships. And we got to do something to fix that because everything is based on trust, everything that we do.
It really is the foundation of society as a whole. Matt, what were your first thoughts?
Well, I guess my view is a little more close in. I'm not thinking about it on such a large scale because I'm so, I guess, blasted right now. My life's pretty busy. And I trust the guys I'm around every day. And we have to. And the trust is built by their actions and their history. And everybody fails here and there, but when you can tell they get back up and they show back up and they're making that effort, I have really no choice but to trust them. I mean, I'm in a position where I have to, and it's scary sometimes, but so far they've always come through for me.
Bam. When you're dealing with explosives, trust is it's a bit it's a bit of a key requirement. Craig, yeah. What were your first thoughts?
I was thinking about it more on like a unit level, interpersonal, and like a small organization. In that trust is something, or any virtue is something that is meaningless when it's easy. Like we establish trust when we see people do things when they're hard to do the right thing. So most of the time we just see protocol, and when someone establishes how trustworthy they are, it's usually because they're doing the right thing when the right thing is hard. And that's not always like some kind of big explosive moment. Sometimes the hard thing is in like a small gesture, like the officer who's standing in the back of the chow line behind all of his guys to make sure that they eat first. You know, it's like little things that compound over time that we see, but we usually only see who someone really is when they're tested in some way. Like if we see a gesture when it's easy to do it, it doesn't mean anything.
This is going to be an interesting convo right off the bat. I can feel it. Sean, what was your first thoughts?
Well, there is a bunch of different ways that this can go. And so myself this morning, what I did was take a look at, or I considered the idea of trust at the very smallest level. So that's with yourself, I think. That's the most granular way you can look at trust is, do you trust yourself? And you got to think about that. You've got to establish how much trust you have in yourself and why you trust yourself in that moment. So building it out from the individual right to, as Craig said, small unit, and then building it out. Now we're at a societal level. Now we're at a global level. Now we're at all of the various levels. And so there's many ways that could go. So I kind of scrapped all of that and thought, okay, what does the panel have some commonality over? And maybe what did we all struggle with in respect to trust in our lives? And this is all I came up with. It's not much to chew on, but I think it's something to think about. And that is, in our military careers, we form trust in a different way than if we would have been civilians. And so in the military, what you have to do is, it's sometimes referred to as fast trust. And that means based on the kinetic moment, or based on the adversity, or based on the, more correctly, life and deathness of the moment, fast trust is required. And fast trust is usually established through a bunch of pre-existing protocols. You've got a badge on this left shoulder and a badge on that right shoulder, and they mean two different things, but I'm going to trust you because you've got those badges. And so fast trust is a thing within the military. Fast trust doesn't really exist so much out in the civilian world. So when you transition from the military to a civilian world, I believe that trust, that idea is where it falls apart for a lot of veterans in the transitional period between military trust and civilian trust.
This is a really cool spot to start. I was when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about things that are congruous, right? Things that have a track record of being the same is usually how, at least the way my brain caught trust as a whole. And just before we get too deep in this conversation, I want to hit these real quick. Vanessa Chaos, good afternoon. Good to see you, Vanessa. Salty, good afternoon. Good to have you here. But let's dive into that, Sean. Let's dig a little deeper into that. Oak, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right. I mean, you know, in the military, there are certain things that give you instant trust, at least to begin with. Then it's yours to lose. But at least you've got that coming in. You're going to have the trust until you prove otherwise. But I think that it, you know, you can absolutely take that trust and the things that you do to earn the trust and to keep the trust in the military. You can use the same things in the civilian world. It may not be the badges and the patches and all that. In some professions, it's degrees, although I disagree with that. But it does give you kind of some instant trust. But it comes down to people and how you treat people, you know. And I think it was Craig was saying, you know, he trusts his people because they prove to him that they're trustworthy. But it's how you treat your people and integrity and all those things that you still had to do in the military, and it works in the civilian world. It's just not instant trust like you are if you got all your badges and patches in the military. You get it automatically, and then you got to lose it.
I like the way you put that. Losing, it's yours to lose, and it's interesting because when it's handed to you, I think you also don't realize what you're getting right off the bat. Matt, you weren't in the military, right? Like, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I definitely never had the advantage of being able to look at a uniform and see, you know, that somebody had, I guess, a credential. Because in the civilian world, they have a website, or they just tell you they can do something, and you're kind of like, well, I guess. And you can do some research. What I've always looked for is, you know, can they do it? Are they doing it? What are they driving? What are they wearing? What do they look like? How do they handle themselves? I can usually tell pretty quick if somebody can get something done. In fact, we were doing a sales a deal yesterday, and a guy came out. And when you do sales of products like I'm in, there's a lot of talk, and there's a few people that move, and they see a good deal and they move, and that's the ones I tend to trust, because I know if I go to them and it's a good deal, I can count on them. They're gonna act, because in our world, there's a lot of sharks around, and if you don't swim fast, you get eaten up. And this guy yesterday, he's been 10 years on the ground doing the very work that our material is required for. So he wasn't somebody that I had to sit down and explain everything to. And I can't explain it, but it's like when you look at them in the eye, you connect and you know this person can get it done. This person will get it done, and I can trust them. I can't explain that, but I've had to live by that pretty much my whole civilian business career. It's kind of like some Jedi crap there, but going off your gut.
The gut, the intuition is I think it's something we're gonna have a conversation about at some point. As a full episode. That'll be an interesting one. Craig, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I think related to what Matt was saying, that's something that we look for, like in building the elite, like our business and the contractors we work with or other organizations. Even like the plumber that comes to my house, like we try to find people. We use the phrase "cup," consistently useful person. Like the guy who edits our podcast is that guy, meaning that I can just send him the episode and it's taken care of. I don't have to look at anything else. Like I always know it's going to be handled, and it just always works. Same as like the guy that I finally found who's our plumber. Like he can just show up and do the work, and I know I don't have to watch him. He's not going to rip me off. Like nothing bad's going to happen. And that is surprisingly hard to find. Like our shipping warehouses that we use to distribute our book. We've gone through like 4 of them before we finally found a company that could just reliably do their job. And it's not even like exceptional heroism. It's just consistently not screwing it up. And it is a very hard thing to find people that are just consistently reliable and that you can trust. And figuring out the right signals for that, like how to identify that early on, can be a little bit difficult, because there's often like the sales side, like people are good at the initial first impression, and then when it comes to like consistently showing up and doing the work all the time, it's sometimes a different thing. And then to Sean's point about thinking of it on a spectrum from like the closest level of internal trust to the broadest level of like what Oak brought up of like national, like societal level trust. The internal trust thing is a really interesting one that we see in special operations candidates, where they're always going into an environment that's chaotic. They have no idea how to predict exactly what's going to happen. So one of the most important variables is just the extent to which they believe that they'll be able to rely on themselves in that unfolding situation to figure it out as they go. And they'll use that phrase, like the guys who are the most reliable will say, "I'll figure it out." They know that they don't know everything that's about to happen or that they're going to see as they go through a course or a deployment or whatever, but they have an internal confidence based on past experiences dealing with ambiguous or rapidly changing circumstances that they're going to be able to adapt and figure it out as they go. And that internal trust is a really important variable in a lot of settings.
So then let me ask you guys this, because it's kind of interesting in my mind what's going on right now. Do you think that we can apply them the same? So like we can trust ourselves, we can really delve into what we believe is an internal trust. Can we apply the same metrics to our inner circle, to our outer circle, to our community abroad? Can we utilize a similar process, or do you think that they have to be separate learned skills? Sean, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
So I think that it's 2 different worlds that can use the same skills, but I'd just like to categorize it as it's 2 different worlds. And so I did make a list on those 2 different worlds, and I'll call it low risk and high risk trust environments. And so with that in place, I'm just going to read some things here. Trust in a standard low risk setting. Trust is formed based on these things in a standard low-risk setting. Warmth and connection. Trust forms through openness, friendliness, and mutual interests. Social norms and cues. Cultural behaviors, etiquette, common expectations. Verbal communication. Starts through rapport, common values, and shared experiences. Time and repetition. Trust builds gradually through consistent positive interactions. Low-stakes testing. Small favors, small reliability, small social bonding reinforces trust. assumed good intentions. The default assumption is that people mean well unless proven otherwise. So that's trust in a standard low risk setting, which is radically different than trust in a high risk adverse setting. So let me ripple that out real quick. Trust in these settings relies on assessment and survival instincts. Trust is built through rapid observation of body language, actions, and microsignals. I'm going to come back to that first one in a sec. Immediate proof of words. Action matters more than verbal assurances. Reliability is demonstrated, not declared. There's minimal time for trust building. The environment forces near instant decisions based on available data. Tactical cooperation over connection. Trust is functional, based on necessity and demonstrated reliability, rather than personal connection. Zero-sum thinking. Misplaced trust can mean death or failure, so skepticism is the default. Controlled vulnerability. A careful balance of openness and caution determines trust levels. So the key differences are, in a low-risk setting, trust is extended until broken. In a high-risk setting, trust is withheld until earned. One relies on emotional connection, the other relies on strategic assessment. One, time is your ally, but in one, time is a luxury. And so I could compare and contrast the two settings all day long. But all of that to say that as I misspoke, I said as all of us within a military setting. Matt, I included you just simply because your career path, in my mind, is very military-like. You're in the same kind of mindsets, you're doing the same kind of things as perhaps Chance was at one point in his career. So maybe carelessly I lumped you in with us dummies. And I think that if anyone is in a high-risk environment, high-risk setting, high-risk or adverse lifestyle, trust looks significantly different than the trust applied at the water cooler in the cubicle farm in the nameless, faceless corporate setting. Risk is completely different. Trust is completely different in these settings. How those move back and forth is for the individual to negotiate. And I think at the start, anyone who's new to negotiating between high risk and low risk trust environments does it wrong. I did it wrong a whole bunch. I probably still do it wrong to this day. I don't calibrate it perfectly for each setting because each environment has a different trust setting, in my opinion.
That's going to take us down a road for sure. Oak, what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, I would agree with his assessment. The only thing I would add is that I agree with the assessment for the high risk. If you're thrown into a high risk and you haven't had the opportunity to build your team and build the trust with your team, I think all those other things that are in the low risk, you can also have in the military if you've had the time to build your team. If not, then yes, absolutely, I agree 100% that all those are. But the one thing that I absolutely agree with, and I think it's even in the civilian world, at least what I've dealt with in the civilian world, and it goes back to what my father used to tell me, and it's kind of like what Sean just said. You know, my father used to say, if you say one thing and you do another, it is your actions that will be believed, 100%. Yeah. So if you, that is baseline, I think, in all of it, that as long as you are, and I think it was Craig that was same thing, show up, do your job, be consistent, all those things, then I think you got a good start on building some trust with people. The first time that you say something and you do something different, it's over. That's going to be a hard road back to the trust, to earn that trust.
We're going to get into rebuilding trust probably in a little bit here because I think it's such a key aspect of this. But before we do, Matt, you got any thoughts?
I like that Sean reads that stuff, it makes me think, because I feel like I get caught in the fray a lot, and then I don't take a lot of time to sit down and talk like I do with you guys. I just got to run. And then what Sean said about the high risk, I was sitting there thinking, wow, that's spot on. I mean, the low risk scenario we can all relate to. That's our friends, that you just hang out with and you trust them. Hey, could you help me move this weekend? You might have a friend that'll help you do that. But, that's a low risk trust. What I find myself in a lot of times is I don't have a choice. There's times where I have to trust, and it's risky and it really balls up in your stomach. And then when you get let down, you get stung. I always think about John Wayne. I'm in my 40s, and I think about John Wayne. He says, life is hard. It's harder if you're dumb. And I think about some of the things I've had to do. And I thought, before I beat myself up, I'm just going to stand here and look at what choices I had. You either stood there and did nothing, and then nothing happened, or you took a leap and you got burned because you had to trust where you shouldn't have. But just don't forget that lesson. And then what will you do next time? And I promise you that lesson will come around, but you'll be wearing a different shirt and it'll be a different flavor. And then in the fray, you got to watch out that you're not the one breaking the trust too, because you can be operating on that survival instinct with no intention to break a trust. But when you're falling and you're grabbing for something and you catch, you turn around and go, crap, would I have liked to have been on the other side of that, what I just did? And, you can really ball yourself up and then you become stagnant. And so you got to keep moving. I mean, life is this beautiful balance, right? And it's not always easy to navigate, and people get hurt. And sometimes you hurt yourself and hurt those around you. It's just tough, man. So it's good to have these conversations and lay it out, Sean. I appreciate you saying that the two different ways, because I feel like I deal with it every day. I just don't talk about it or lay it out. I just have to I'm playing Frogger. I'm playing Frogger. Remember the old video game, little frog jump across the road? And that's what the game of trust is like sometimes. You feel like you're playing Frogger, and sometimes you get mashed.
Yep. Get run over pretty fast. Actually, it made me think while you were talking there was the I looked up at Craig and I was like, he was in the Navy. And I was thinking about rescue divers, how you don't want to approach a drowning victim from the front, right? Because they're going to pull you down. And I was just realizing how much that there's a trust level there, that when you're just trying to survive, none of that seems to matter, right? Because you're just solely focused on personal survival, and whether or not you can trust the people around you in those moments is maybe less important. Craig, you got any thoughts on any of this?
The main thing I was thinking of was that I think experience or expertise in a field is one of the things that allows you to know who to trust quickly. Like, it gives you this kind of, it's hard to write it down in bullet points or anything. It's just kind of an instinct for the right signals for who's trustworthy and who's not. And I think that's one of the big markers of expertise, is you can assess other people around you and know who's trustworthy and who isn't. But in some fields, that can be miscalibrated if there's no accurate feedback loop. Like, people can develop a pet theory for what's reliable or who's trustworthy or not, and they may have never actually validated that theory, and people can be wrong, which I've seen in like research on detecting deception, for instance, like in how to tell if someone's lying or not. There are people that feel really confident in their ability to tell someone's lying, and in often cases, that confidence inversely correlates with accuracy, and people are very confident in their assessment of people, and it's actually really inaccurate because they've never had a feedback loop. So I've always been interested in how someone learns to assess other people and their trustworthiness or their reliability. Like, Matt, in your line of work, you've got a random new guy that you're working with who has the potential to blow your hand off, I assume, if they screw something up. How do you know? Like, how do you know if someone's going to be reliable?
Right.
What do you think, Matt?
Well, with explosives, we're gonna ease them in there. I'm not gonna hand him the blasting cap. I do have a new guy, actually. It's funny you bring it up, and he's just driving trucks around with, like, we need tools or equipment, and he runs and gets boxes of inert stuff, operating heavy equipment. He's breaking things down, and he's going to get like a month of that, where we just give him tasks that are not dangerous. They're just tasks that have to be done. And then we grow that up. And then as we're blowing things up, we need somebody to help run out a wire, or check this or check that, help us get a count on the boxes, and of course we're always going right behind checking the wire and double counting the boxes. But through that month-long process of doing the benign, you get to get a feeling of who that person is, how you can count on them. Hey, are you here at 7:00 in the morning? Have you been doing that for a month? Are you coming up with excuses all the time and you come in at 8:30 and obviously that's a red flag. But it's also a small town where I live and everybody knows everybody. And so it's an advantage. Maybe there's not a uniform system here with badges, but everybody knows everybody since they were born. And that does help a lot. And then there's a sense of accountability too, because that those people know that if they let you down, that's going to get around. And so that helps hold them accountable because it's a community, if a guy comes to work for me and he's just not working out, the way I fire him is I just say, hey, I don't have any more work for you, and then if they say why, I'll just tell them that this is why, because I can't use you in the capacity I need because of what you're bringing to the table. And you're not bringing to the table the qualities that we need to do this job. So what's the point? I'm not going to bring a Corvette out to do a dump truck job, So I don't know what started that, but that's where I'm at.
It's asking how you vet people for reliability or trustworthiness. So you're sort of like kind of to what Sean alluded to. You're assessing for conscientiousness in starting with very low stakes settings and then increasing the magnitude of the stressor or the magnitude of the test to see if they can remain conscientiousness as you rely on them more. Which I think is how it works in any industry, really.
Yeah.
And especially explosives, actually. And I just wanted to touch on this too, because when I was in the military, obviously we start things small, right? You always do little things at first. So the first thing we got to blow up was a blasting cap. But that wasn't before we spent 15 hours in the classroom learning about the theory of explosives, right? And velocity of detonation and how to do all the things first. Then we went to the range. And even then we had an instructor directly over top of us watching us as we were putting the wires together and crimping things on. Like everything was done under a very careful, watchful eye. To the point that they even had to explain that you can't crimp detonating, you can't crimp dets with your teeth. You would think that that's common knowledge, but apparently not so much. Oak, you got any thoughts on anything so far?
Yeah, I think this is a great conversation. And I think, it as Sean said, it starts with you and then you work your way out from there. But if you don't trust yourself, then it doesn't really matter who else is on the team and who else you're dealing with. Because if you don't trust yourself, then other people aren't going to trust you either, because they will quickly pick up on that you don't trust yourself.
And I think on top of that, there's people that they trust themselves a little bit too much. Like they don't have the skill set. They have the overconfidence, let's say. Do you think that plays into it? Is that an actual trust issue, or do you think it is just an overall overconfidence, more like an ego
I
thing?
think it's just an ego issue. I think, when I talk about leadership, I talk about good leaders know when to put their ego aside, that they don't know everything. They don't have all the knowledge, all the skills, all the abilities, and that they got to use people on their team, their skills, knowledge, and abilities, and be able to put your ego aside when you're in that situation and use the people on your team when need be. And I see that's a hard thing for leaders to do today, is put their ego aside.
This is going to be an interesting. Sean, what are you thinking on that?
I am thinking that we're talking about discriminating or delineating the sense of trust. How much do I trust the guy who's driving around my back 40 right now with a truck full of explosives and cardboard boxes? I'm not going to let them blow anything up, but I'm going to trust them to drive around in my back 40 right now. And so, like, how much trust do you allow a person on day 1, day 2, day 12, day 27? And so I think that on day 1, all of us are applying our instinct. We're assessing We're using our perception to understand the raw reality of the moment. And if our perception is poorly tuned, so if this is our first time with someone standing in front of us for the first time with the keys to the truck full of explosives, if that's our first rodeo, our instinct isn't really refined. Our perception of the moment is still trying to perceive a pattern. And on pattern number 1, there isn't much to work with. Now, Matt has probably gone through this iteration several times. So on day 1, as he's got the keys in his hand and he's eyeballing what's in front of him, his perception of that moment or his instinct of the moment is going to be telling him some things that aren't being said verbally. It's the story behind the story, as it were. And Matt may be doing this and then change his mind and bring the keys back and say, you know what? I'm not sure this is going to work out. And nothing had to be done. Nothing had to be said beyond that point. But somewhere in between taking the keys out of his pocket and getting them almost to the individual in front of him, we'll call it he changes his mind. But really what it is his perception. His filter that he currently owns, his filter of the natural phenomenon that's unfolding in front of us in real time, his filter says, no, this is a non-starter. This person doesn't get the keys. Matt may not even know why he thinks that until maybe later that day he sits down and takes his perception moment and thinks about it to figure out why it felt jinky, why it felt hanky, why it felt whatever word he uses to say, no, the keys are not going to this dude. You're fired. And so the other individual who was about to get the truck keys for the first time, they showed up with hopes. They wanted the job. They want to learn from Matt. They've been in the town for a while. They've got a reputation. But in that moment, the reputation isn't enough for Matt to hand over the keys. If it was, the person would have the keys. And so in that tiny little 1 to 2 to 3 second moment, there's lifetimes worth of decisions being made that no one sees and sometimes doesn't even understand themselves as it's unfolding in those 2 to 3 seconds. So what is trust? Trust isn't just a one-dimensional word that you can get to a moment in life and pull trust off the shelf and say, now I'm going to evaluate trust this moment. Okay? Moment evaluated, trust goes back on the shelf. I believe, well, Sean does anyway, always I'm understanding a person through the lens of trust, not just the simple term of, do I trust them or not? To me, trust is a analog scale that is moving up and down all the time, not just based on what they've accomplished in their life, but what we have to accomplish right now. Are you the right person for the job or not? And if you're not the right person, are you the kind of person who can figure it out with me right now? And so trust is many things, not just past, not just future, but in the present, that can look like a whole pile of different things, depending on what needs to be done in that moment.
I wrote down here micro consistencies and snap judgments. And I think this is kind of what trust is built on, at least what I've kind of observed over time, is that depending, as you said, Sean, depending on the situation, depending on what needs to be done either right now or the plan for whatever is going on, there's going to be either micro consistencies or there's going to be inconsistencies that we either pick up on consciously or subconsciously, to the point of Matt handing someone the keys and going, no, maybe there was just that little glimmer in that person's eye, or a little tiny little smile that just was like, that's not the right reaction. Now that could be, that could just be a snap judgment, and maybe that person isn't that way. But in that instant, seeing that either that inconsistency or something like that, I've heard many times, when you meet somebody and they're fit and they're in good shape and they're not walking around slouched over, things like little physical posture things can tell you a lot about a person. And I think it's in those consistencies when we're talking about snap judgments.
Can I just throw one more thing in just to help the conversation refine it maybe a bit more? I believe one of the crux moments of this conversation is built on low risk, high risk. So Matt, as an example, as he's handing over the keys, that's not a low risk moment. That's not looking at someone that you've just met for the first time and saying, can you go sharpen 12 pencils by the end of today over at the pencil sharpener? That'll be your day. And so, like, sharpening pencils in an office cubicle is different than a higher risk situation. And here's why it's different. It's not about the pencils. It's not about the truck. It is about the individual who's about to apply trust on that person. If it's a high risk situation, if I'm handing the keys over, I'm assessing for high risk outcomes, circumstances, the results of my poor decision-making process in the moment. Whereas in the office cubicle where there's just 12 pencils to be sharpened, the risk factor is way less. And so what I do believe happens is in an office low risk scenario, people become desensitized to their natural instinct that is supposed to keep not just them safe, but the clan safe. And so I'm proposing that trust is desensitized in low risk situations, whereas in high risk, it is perhaps even oversensitized to better understand our instinct, correct or incorrect in the moment.
I'm digging this already. We got a comment on the Instagram side. Craig Zelinsky says, just what you're talking about, Sean. I think our instinct is probably very reliable. The issue is our ability to feel it. The more disassociated we are with how we feel, the more we'll lean on thinky brain to replace instinct, in his opinion. I think that's 100% right. Oak, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent perception there that, you know, the more we're in those situations where we have to make decisions based on our instinct, the better that gets, and the better we get at turning our brain piece off and saying, okay, my gut just says this, even though my mind says something else. And the people with more experience, like Sean said, the more experience you have in there, the more you have to draw on, and the better your instincts are going to be, and the more you're willing to rely on that instinct rather than what your mind is telling you.
Craig, what are you thinking?
Yeah, that was Gavin de Becker's book that's pretty well known, The Gift of Fear. His argument was essentially that we have well-developed instincts for judging situations and people for like the threat of danger, and that a lot of people, like as Craig Zelinsky is saying, kind of shut that down and ignore that voice, that instinct, and it can be really dangerous to do so. But we're pretty good at instinctively evaluating situations and people if we trust that and develop that instinct. But from what I mentioned earlier, like there are other forms of that, like detecting deception fields, where that instinct can become miscalibrated pretty easily if people don't have an effective feedback loop. And there are a lot of people who trust their gut, and their gut is super inaccurate, like 80% inaccurate. So you have to be careful about how that concept is applied and how well calibrated it's been through an effective feedback loop.
Well, I think Craig, that's a great concept, because I talk about reflection all the time, and you know, you have to reflect back on decisions you made and those calls you made on your instinct. You know, take the emotion piece out of it at that point. Step back and say, what did I believe and what actually happened, and what could have been the reason why my instinct was wrong, my gut feeling was wrong. And you can kind of, maybe there was something that you can fix at that point, and the next time that you got to make that call, you'll take that into account. But I think reflection is something that most humans don't do enough of, or if they do it, they're not really honest with themselves, because reflection without honesty is worthless. Absolutely worthless.
Yeah, that's just rationalization. Yeah. I've always been interested in people who have had a ton of rapid exposures to human behavior, like bartenders, bouncers, people like that, who've just observed this like microcosm of people acting like monkeys, more or less, and
Yeah.
and the instincts that they can develop through that rapid high density exposure to human behavior, because they become really good judges of character or judges of behavior, or predicting behavior pretty fast in that setting.
Yeah, I tended bar. My father had a bar when I was in college, and I tended bar. And you certainly start to pick up those things, those instincts about, okay, what's the next thing that's going to happen here, and you can start kind of seeing things. But yeah, but I think, as Sean has kind of brought up, it comes with that experience. That the first time you do it, you're probably not going to be right, or if you are right, maybe it was just luck or something happened that made you right. But the more you're in those situations where you have to use your instinct, the more you have to draw on, the more experience, and you're probably going to do better and better each time. You still could make a mistake, like you're saying. You could be absolutely wrong, but the chances of you being absolutely wrong go down with the more experience you have, I believe.
Here's a question for you guys, and I'm wondering how much the ability to build up your instincts, or perhaps listen to your instincts better, is correlated with your ability to accept pain. Because I think for the people that are non-instinctual, that have completely numbed that out, they don't accept pain. When they do something, they trust something, and then it burns them, they never want to trust something in that realm ever again. Right? They just shut up. I was having a conversation with my massage therapist earlier, and her take on this was like relationship wise, right? If you are with somebody and they betray you, that's going to affect all your other relationships from then on. And I'm wondering how much, whether or not you listen to your instincts and you develop your instincts comes from your ability to then re-engage in the pain system, right? Of like, oh, I'm going to give out a little bit more trust because I'll be capable of taking that pain again. What do you guys think? Sean, I can see you got a point. What do you got?
I do. I'm going to have to change some of your language in this.
Go for it.
First of all, I just want to say that I haven't read Gavin de Becker's book, so I'm not familiar with that work. And I would guess that as part of his book, he talks about, for lack of a better term, how to pressure test yourself, or how to pressure test things around you to have a better understanding of the feedback loop, etc., which I believe is part of trust. I mean, you can trust everyone around you blindly till the day you die, and maybe take to your grave that you think you could have trusted them in the moment that it counted, but you never tested it. And so then it's a blind belief. And then your instinct is based on blind belief. And so my opinion is everything has to be pressure tested, myself and everything around me. And so if I'm putting trust in someone or something, I am also attaching very closely to the hip a pressure test loop, and not just a one and done. I'll come back to it again and again and again to make sure that the standard, as I like to think of it, is being met on the trust relationship. So, Chance, as part of that, I just want to reframe some of your language, at least for me, and maybe for some of the listeners, because I think that, extending yourself into a new relationship or into another relationship that was preceded by, a poor relationship or a doomed relationship, I don't look at that as like taking a risk per se, because taking a risk has a negative connotation to it where you're like, oh, it's another gamble. It's probably going to be terrible. But, that's kind of like a doom and gloom word, taking a risk. Whereas I think having curiosity is a way different word, but it's the same kind of loop. You're curious as to whether the next iteration will play out differently, the same, good or bad, whatever. Curiosity is different than take a risk. And so by framing it as mentally taking a risk, there's more of a reluctance to do it again and again and again. Whereas if you think like Sherlock Holmes, man, I failed on that one. I've got to figure this out. I'm curious as if is it possible to solve the next iteration? approaching it with curiosity, I believe, is the right framework. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that framework for sure. Matt, you got any thoughts on this? You've been quiet for a little while.
Oh, well, I've been thinking. Um, I think whether you like it or not, life is a lot like those video games where you start out little man in the corner and the screen is black, and as he moves, there's a little area around him lights up, but as he moves, it gets black behind him again, because you don't know what you don't know, and to what Sean was saying, it's not so much a risk. You're exploring. You're going through life and you're exploring. You're like a little explorer, and you're learning stuff, and you're getting stung and bit. And if you said, well, that sucks, like if the first thing you walked upon was the enemy, in the game, and it attacked you, and you went back to your little corner and sat there, there's no point in playing that game. So you go back out and you remember the lesson you learned from that, but you don't assume that every place you go is going to get you the same result as the last one. And if you think about a child when they're little, I got a little boy, he crawls around and falls all the time. And he bites his lip when he's eating sometimes, and starts screaming. And we all know how bad that hurts when you bite your cheek when you're eating. And but kids, they don't say, well, I'm not going to walk anymore. I'm not going to crawl anymore. They just keep going, and they don't make it about them against the world. They're just exploring, and they're growing, and they know, you know what? I'm not going to get real close to the edge of this chair because it flips. I know not to trust that, but that doesn't mean they're not going to go crawl on the couch or maybe even crawl in that chair, but they know the limit. In fact, I have people that I work with that I know are rattlesnakes, and I still use them, but I know they're rattlesnakes. I've got, if you got a pet rattlesnake, you got it in a cage, you feed it, you take care of it. It's a snake. I don't stick my finger in there and wiggle it around, but you have some purpose for that snake. And there's people that I know, I've watched them at any moment. This guy could just leave. He's got stuff going on in his life that he doesn't want to talk about. Move him in, and he does excellent work. In fact, no one I've ever worked with can work like this guy. I mean, he's a one-man army. I can say, clean this yard up, and I need everything stacked over here, here, here. And I can trust that guy. He will get that done. It's really phenomenal. But at the same time, if something else in the ethereal of the other stuff that's going on in his life pops up and requires him, he'll be gone in the night. I know that. I accept that. I know that I cannot trust him for a long term, but I can trust him to get that immediate job done extremely well. So sometimes I have to just deal with that. And I guess, also as you go through this experience where, back to the example of the video game where it's darkness all around you, what can you trust? And that's yourself. And it made me think of one of my favorite poems, Rudyard Kipling, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make room for their doubting too. Because I don't think it's healthy to just blindly go out and just trust yourself to no end and understand you are fallible, and then make a study of that. And when you fail, review it, think about it, and be honest. I think, Oak, you said that. Honesty, reflection without honesty is, pointless. And there's no one around. It's you in your head, so you might as well be completely honest. And ask yourself, why did I fail here? What am I doing? Because ultimately, if you don't take responsibility for that, you'll just loop. You'll loop it over and over, and you'll see those things over again. I do it. In fact, I've looped over mistakes in my life, and I'm like, wow, I made the same stupid mistake or poor choice or failure. It came in a different flavor, a different design. But if you back up and look at it, you realize, oh yeah, and I have responsibility for that. I even have responsibility for when people fail me, because it's not always just them. Like that guy, if he wants to leave in the night and it was crucial before something, well, I had put him on the team at a crucial time, so I have to share responsibility to that. So it is something interesting to consider and think about. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. I got one point on the fog is what it's called in video games. Is when you have the fog is outside of anything that your reticule is visible at that point in time. There's a comment on the Instagram side, Little Woodwork said, I don't make mistakes. I make learning experiences, a lot of them. Just fantastic, because it's really true. I play a game that has a very strict field of view, and you can only see what your character has in this little cone. It's actually a CQB game that is from on top. And it's really interesting to only be able to see in a very, very acute angle rather than what we normally see, which is, most of 180 degrees if you're aware. And I think it's a great analogy for life, in that the tighter you bring that angle, you can be focused on something, and whether that anything outside of that focus then becomes almost untrustworthy because you can't see it.
If you don't mind, there is a big difference here, though. So I love the idea. I love the example of the video game. It really works, for sure. But it doesn't work now when you compare it against woodworkers or a woodworking person who said, they make mistakes and they have to learn. You make mistakes in a video game and you have to learn, but there's no cost in the video game other than just your time. In woodworking, you got to buy a new piece of wood. So there's consequences in woodworking. There's no consequences in a video game. So currently, in our modern world, we have a generation that is being raised up on video games, and the consequence is just start the game over. But a generation or two or three prior, if you made a mistake, the consequence was there was some cost, some personal cost to it. And so the delta between a personal cost and a non-cost can create a different learning outcome. And so I'll make the comparison to a corporate world and a military world as an example. On a corporate world, the pencils show up for free, and you're in the corner, you're sharpening all 12 pencils, and if you screw it up, who cares? It's corporate money. You can kind of think of that the same way in a military setting, except every time you're wasteful, it's costing all of those around you, and we all know that for sure. And so there's a different vibe to a corporate sense and maybe a small team military sense. And so these costs, whether they're actual dollar bills or the costs that we all know kind of hover in the background that no one talks about, the costs have consequences to the understanding of what trust means.
Craig, I know you got something working in your brain. What do you got?
I just went on a whole sidetrack in my head because I think some of those characters that kids build in video games are like one time, and if your character gets killed, it's like done. And it's a really big deal to some of those kids if their character gets wiped out, which is a whole unnecessary sidetrack. To what you were saying, Chance, about the embrace or acceptance of pain, there is actually a good amount of research on that. And interoception, or the ability to sense and monitor your internal state or be like mentally present with physical discomfort, is a significant correlate with resilience in people. They've done studies where they stick people in like kind of a brain scanner, and they give them a tube to breathe through, and they periodically deprive them of oxygen to see how they respond. And the people whose brain scans initially show a higher level of internal awareness of their bodily state at the start of the test perform better and are less prone to panic and like emotional reactivity or stress responses than people who are numb and can't sense into their internal state. Because the people who have a high level of internal awareness of their physiological state are able to predict what a stressor is going to feel like, and then they're able to consciously manage their response to it, where the people who are numb and are tuned out of their body and aren't paying attention to their emotional state, they're just sort of hiding from it, they're constantly running. They have to run away from it, and then they can't accurately predict what an upcoming challenge or stressor is going to feel like, so they're caught off guard and they panic. So the people who scored really low in internal awareness or interoception often had to be pulled from the study because they'd have panic attacks inside the scanner. But the people who had higher levels of self-awareness, like physiological self-awareness, which in this study were, I think, mostly military special operators. It didn't phase them. They were totally fine being deprived of oxygen for a while, and they just kind of checked out once they knew that that was happening and paid attention to something else. So yeah, the ability to pay attention to pain and embrace it and work with it actively rather than running away from it is an important part of like self-regulation and resilience, and it's like how reliable you are to think clearly under stress.
Ooh, I really like that. I got the image of like a dam, right? If you're not paying attention to any of the indicators inside the dam, and that thing will, when it bursts, it's going to be catastrophic. Whereas if you're constantly aware of the things that are changing and the inputs that you're getting within that dam, you can mitigate and you can open, sluice gates and all those kind of things so that you don't explode catastrophically.
Yeah.
Love that. That's awesome. Oak, I'm gonna come to you. What do you got? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the concept and the talk that we're having, that to be resilient, you have to have that ability, like Sean said, be curious, and that kind of reminds me that when you use the word risk, it kind of reminds me of Field Marshal Rommel's quote, the difference between a risk and a gamble. A risk you can recover from, a gamble you're done. And so I never used curiosity, but I think that's a good one, and I think I may start using that, Sean. Thank you. Because if you don't have that, then you're just going to shut down. You're not going to be a productive member of. You're not going to be productive in life. You're not going to be a productive member of your family or your community or your team or whatever it is you're on, because you're going to be so afraid of getting hurt again or having that pain, whatever that pain is, that you just say, okay, I'm done. And we see people like that. I mean, I think we've all probably seen people like that the first time they have adversity, they just shut down. They're no longer a productive member of the team. And it's sad. And it comes to the point where it is an individual thing, and it can be learned how to be better at dealing with adversity.
I'm wondering how much this has to do with, having good people at the, Sean says this a lot, where you have the right people at the right time saying the right things, and the development of trust throughout your life, I think, really comes as you start to build your own sense of internal trust. It usually comes from either difficulty and managing that yourself, or through some sort of mentor or instructor or teacher that you can almost aspire to be. And I'm wondering, how much do you guys think that is, where do you think it leans towards the mentorship, where you build your trust under someone? Or do you think it's more personal, playing with the world to build up your own trust? Matt, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
Well, my experience has been playing with the world. I guess because at this point in my life, most of this life, I've been working for myself, but I'm not doing everything by myself. I'm having to work with other people all the time. And I did have a couple of good mentors early on, and I trusted them with a lot, and they trusted me. And so I saw that was the framework for the most productive scenario, is when I trusted my mentor and my mentor trusted me, and I could go do one thing and he could go do another. And at the end of the day, we come back and complete the task. And so then setting out on my own, you're always wondering, can I trust this person? But guys, as I'm sitting here listening to this conversation, it's so broad. It's scattered everywhere, because, you go everywhere from relationship wise to trusting that guy with a blasting cap to trusting yourself. I don't know what happens, because we all start out the same as little babies that are crawling, and the world beats us up, but we keep going until we can walk and run and jump, And yet somewhere in there, people start peeling off in these different categories. Some people start getting hurt, and then like, I never want to go through that again. And then other people just stay just like they were when they were a little baby. They get hurt, they get up, they move to the next one, they try a little bit different, they keep moving. And I don't know what that difference is, because we started the same, but we don't finish the same. That's kind of interesting to me. But trust is, what do they say? It's, I've heard it said before, it's hard to build, easy to lose, and a lot harder to build back. I've had people fail me, and I've failed other people before. And I definitely give chances, like, hey, what happened? Come back. Let's learn from this. Because if somebody fails me, I have something to learn from it too, and I want to glean from that. I don't want to just, oh, it's always their fault. It's always somebody else. In fact, if you look within, in most scenarios in your life, it's like a very rich orchard, and there's fruit all around you in every experience you have, whether you failed or someone else failed. And the best ones happen when you look within yourself and you go, okay, what of this can I control? And how can I do it better next time? And how can I recognize it better next time? And I think that's what the little kids are doing when they're crawling around and they're falling over chairs, and they cry a little bit and they get right back up and keep trying it again. But then we get too smart for our own good and we overthink stuff. And then we start getting paralysis, like, oh, I don't want to go because I remember last time. Well, what did Rommel say? Oak, you said a gamble you can't recover, a risk
you can recover from. A gamble, you're done.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, learning to crawl is just risks. Now, you barely learn how to walk and you want to try a wingsuit. That's probably a gamble, and you might not recover from that. But as you grow and you expose yourself to these little tidbits and you're growing, it's like anything else. I mean, really, there are patterns that are throughout. Look at how an oak tree grows into an oak tree. It's not overnight. It's an acorn. And then it finds its way in the ground. The roots go and they hit something. They turn. They find a crack and they go in there. And then the oak starts getting bigger. And before you know, it's a mighty oak. But it didn't happen that way overnight. And we should be the same way. I don't think the oak tree would hit a stone and be like, well, that's it. I'm never going back there because I know it's hard. I can't grow. And you go around it. And sometimes you break rocks in half, So it's what a dynamic thing to discuss, and so broad, because it has to do with the people you work with, the relationships you're in, and yourself. And recently, I'm working on a kind of a big deal, a lot of money involved, and I'm working with people that I've never met through the phone. And that's definitely that fog in a video game, because you're telling somebody this is what I've got, this is the price, and then they start bullying you on the phone. And then, when you try to be a nice guy, that gets you nowhere. And so you have to lay down some groundwork, and then you ask yourself, are they telling me the truth? And all the while, they're wondering, is he telling me the truth? And so it's is it gamble? I don't know, because what's at risk if it all goes south? I wouldn't call it a gamble, but it's definitely a risk. And I had some really stressful nights, actually. And the only thing, and this is kind of funny, I can't trust people I'm talking to on the phone. I just can't. I mean, there's no gut action there because I don't get to know them. Can I trust myself? Yeah. But remember that whole thing about leave room for some doubting too. And so there's doubt creeps in there, and the whole John Wayne thing gets my head and goes, life's hard, but it's hard when you're dumb, Matt. And then, I had a stress headache. It was so stressful that right between my eyes, it was hurting so bad. There was nothing I could do. This might not go for everybody, but for me, man, I started praying, and I was kind of embarrassed to pray about it, because personally, the stuff of this life, like, oh, I made some money, or I lost my car, or my house burned down, like, I ain't gonna bother God about that. Like, it's not a big deal. But I just started praying in a thankful way, thankful for everything that I've been given in this life, thankful for opportunities that are stressful. And I asked for wisdom how to navigate through it. And just, I guess you kind of build a shell when you go through that fog and you get hit, and it's not like, oh, I'll never go back. It's just like, okay, I got a little bit thicker skin now. I'm gonna go back in. I'm gonna see if it's a little bit different. And I was thankful for that experience. It's not like, whoa, I really hope this works out and I need this because I want to buy another tank. Who cares? Really, who cares? That stuff doesn't matter.
I mean, I care. A second tank, absolutely. I'm down. I'm down for that.
I know, but I find myself. Here's funny. So my friend, we went half. We bought a 25 millimeter cannon, and it's cool. It arrived yesterday. I didn't even go see it. I don't have time. I enjoy that stuff, but I'm really enjoying. I know this is so cliche, but I was driving the other day and I saw my little boy, running across the yard. And I'm like, stop. Hey, get in. Let's just ride around together, because they're growing up. And I know dang good and well that at the end of my life, hanging out with those kids is going to be what I regretted if I don't do it. It's not going to be going to see that cannon, I mean, it's just what it is.
Yeah. The cannon can't hug you. I mean, you can hug people downrange, but it's not quite the same thing when you have kids. And I like what you're talking about here, and it brought back this kind of a mantra that I've had for a while now, that I actually learned in the military that I didn't understand until later on, which was the beatings will continue until morale improves. And I think it's an accurate statement when it comes to especially trust, is that, if you don't learn a lesson, it's going to happen again and again until you figure it out. And then gratitude is such a big thing. It's such a big part of this. I love it. Sean, what are your thoughts on any of this?
So the word Rommel has come up a couple of times now, more than a couple of times. And of course, Rommel is an interesting historical character. There's a lot to learn from his story and the surrounding stories of that era. But when Oak said Rommel, bam, something flashed into my mind. I was never going to tell this story, but I'm going to tell it now. And this just happened recently when I was down in California visiting my old-time friend. And my old-time friend, meaning that we came up through the military together. We served in 2 Commando together. We're a Pathfinder platoon together. We went into Tier 1 Special Operations together. We didn't hold hands the entire time. It's not like we were dancing down the yellow brick road, joining things together simultaneously. Our careers intermingled, as it were. So I'm down in California visiting him just the other week. I spent a week down there. And we decided that we were going to watch SAS Rogue Heroes Season 2 together. And if you haven't watched SAS Rogue Heroes, what the hell? What is even wrong with you?
Season 2 is out?
What? Season 2 is out.
It's so good.
So if you don't know what we're talking about, SAS Rogue Heroes, screw you. Get with the program and start watching SAS Rogue Heroes. And so season 1 has been unleashed last year. Season 2 is out now, 6 episodes. And generally, for anyone who doesn't know what it's about, here's the quick backstory. There's a British unit called Special Air Service, the British SAS, that became quite famous, or notorious, we'll say, in World War II. They had a storied career, as it were. They went on to arguably become one of the most notable Tier 1 Special Operation units of their time. And so that's the backstory. Now, Season 2, myself and my friend Marlon is his name. We're down in his place in California, Irvine, California, for the week. And we're watching Season 2. So at some point in Season 2, and this is not spoiling it for anyone, this is just history. At some point in Season 2, there is a crew called the Originals, like the plank holders of the British SAS. So the first few that formed up the unit, they go through a bunch of actions together. They are in combat together. They trained together. Post-combat, they're hanging out together. They formed up a very, very strong trust, like a brotherhood. And so, in Season 2, the new guys come in, the replacements. They're not originals. They're not plank holders. But they mostly are all drawn from the British Commando units to form up, which was then going to be called 2 SAS, or a different SAS. So the first ones are originals. The second ones are the add-ons that came on later in the campaign. Now, in the series, on the show, what you will see is the friction between the originals and the incoming replacements. There's one single episode that really focuses on that friction between the incoming and the already existing. Now, At face value, both groups went through the same kind of training to wear the cap badge, the British SAS cap badge. But we all know that there's a difference between training and then actually forming that tighter brotherhood of you're in a really adverse situation and it just changed the way you look at the person standing next to you. It is now a tighter relationship. There is now more trust. The thing that you can count on in training is different than the thing you can count on in real explosions, we'll call it. So, in this series, SAS Rogue Heroes, an entire episode dedicated to the disconnect between a group and another group that on paper look the same, but are wildly different based on one group has done something together, whereas the other group has not done it yet. It's a really important aspect of trust. And it is not about all the bullets going down range. It's not about throwing all of the hand grenades over the ditch. It's not about all of the war. It's about a moment in time, a shared moment where a group of individuals bonds in a more trustworthy way based on X, Y, and Z. And there's a bunch of reasons why that is. That's not the focus. What I am focusing on is the wild difference between two groups of men that shouldn't be that different, but in reality, and as portrayed in the season, there is a big difference between the originals and the follow-ons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we saw
Go for it.
it, and I don't think it even has to be some special group of people. I mean, we saw that in Vietnam as replacements came in, they weren't accepted for the ones who had already been in combat day in and day out and established that bond. It took that newbie a little bit of time to gain that acceptance and trust in that unit. I think that's just human nature. That when you go through something with somebody else, you build that a deeper relationship, build that trust just a little bit deeper, build that your instincts that on what that person's going to be able to do or can't do is better gauged. So I think that's a normal human reaction, and I'm sure it's even more in. I've never been in a special ops unit, so I don't know that piece of it. But I've certainly been in combat units, and the new guy is always looked at with some skepticism when they first get there. Can I trust him? I don't know what he's able to do or if he can do what we're asking him to do. But once he's in it and he does it a few times, then he's accepted into the group. So I think that's a good point, Sean.
And so if I can just add one more piece to that now, because I believe we've all experienced that. Yeah. Now, here's the beautiful part to this little story is as I was watching that with my buddy, we were actually in the same situation as that episode in the when JTF2 or Tier 1 Special Operations in Canada was first formed up. I was part of the originals, a plank holder, whereas my buddy Marlon was a next wave. He came in after the fact. In fact, I put him through a bunch of his training. I interrogated him, for goodness sakes. We were both laughing about it when I was down there. I'd forgotten that I interrogated him, but he hadn't. And so so he'd come in as a second wave. And so he looked at himself differently in respect to me, and I looked at him differently in respect to who he was back in the day when he first came on board. Even though I had a good understanding of who he was before he showed up in that new game, I still treated him like a noob. And so he had to kind of, again, regain my trust. And so there we were many years later in California, just the other week, laughing about how what plays out on TV, SAS Rogue Heroes episode, actually played out in real life for the two of us. I used to look at him and say, boy, you're going to get it. And he got it. And so I think that in that moment, both of us realized that throughout our lives, when we compared our two lives, there's been times when our positions have been flip-flopped, where I had to gain his trust, he had to gain my trust, and so on and so forth. And even though we've got a really long track record, there's still times, just like last week, there's still times today where we are kind of constantly making sure that our trust relationship is not just strong, but continues to grow. That's my real point.
Yeah, that's a great point.
This is an interesting thought on this, because I want to go back to what you said earlier, Sean, when you were talking about things need to be pressure tested. And I think that's what anybody coming in, any new person coming into an environment, really any environment, there's going to be a pressure test. Now, whether that is high pressure in terms of special operations or military or something like that, or low pressure, I need you to go sharpen 12 pencils. That's the pressure test at the moment, right? Is if you're coming in new, I'm going to figure it out. But that's based on a preceding system that's already built in, right? For yourself, Sean, as a plank holder, as the guys of the Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, when they first started the SAS, they were just kind of making it up. They just knew that they needed to do something different. So what do? We start learning from other people. We start bringing in information, and we just smash it together and see what works. So I think there's a slight difference on that. When you're a plank holder, you went through the trenches. You're the one that actually defined how to do these things. Then anybody new coming in is going to be tested to that standard. So the interesting thing I find about this is there's I guess an old philosophical question is like, when is a ship a new ship? If you take it out to sea and you're replacing things as you use it, you're going to put up a new mast, you're going to add a new sail, you're going to add a new deck board after a fight, whatever it is. When does the ship become a new ship? What if you replace all of the panels from the originals? None of the originals are there anymore, but that ship is still sailing with the same skill set or same level as prior to it. It's from the standards of those that preceded everything, right? The people that had to figure it on their own. So my question, and I'm going to come to you on this, Craig, because you train people to go into these situations. How much do you have to teach people to like accept that the standards are there for a reason? How much do you have to teach people to lay their trust in that standard?
When you say the standard, do you mean like the entry stakes to start a selection course? Like you have to run 1.5 miles in 9 minutes or that kind of thing? Or do you mean like performance standards in a Q course or during a workup or something like that? Like, how do you mean the standards?
I mean what the instructors are looking for, basically. So like Sean's used this description before, is that when somebody comes in, he's making assessments on them, right? As okay, this guy's got the skill sets, or he doesn't, or he has. Sorry, I'm not thinking more of the physical skill sets, but the aptitudes,
Like
the ability to what the person's like. Yeah, exactly.
With our clients, we don't have to make that argument. Like the people we work with are always trying to exceed standards, whatever they are. We've never had to like cajole anyone into meeting a minimum level of any kind of standard. Like nearly everyone that we work with, just for whatever reason, just the nature of our branding or the reputation we have, the people who show up to us are not trying to meet the minimum standard. Their goal is to understand what is expected of them and exceed it. And I think that's probably true in most special operations communities. Like Sean was talking about his buddy Marlon. Like Marlon initially showed up as a new guy who was trying to meet the standard and like become a part of the unit. But eventually that torch gets carried on, and now Marlon is holding the standard and pushing it further than it's been before. Like JTF2 is different now than it was 20, 30 years ago, same as the community I came from. Like it's evolved. It's gotten more capable based on the successes and the mistakes made by the people who started it, who were there earlier. So all of the new guys who are coming in and being viewed with skepticism, some of them will be washed out because they don't meet those standards. but a lot of them will also take that community further than it's ever been. And that's part of what you're vetting them for, is their ability to take that community beyond where you've brought it and to continue building it.
It's Sean, Chance, that was a very interesting question. And I took it differently, or at least when you were talking, something went through my mind. There is a difference between the first people who go through, who have to figure it out as they're going, and who are developing those standards and saying, okay, can we push it a little bit further? What is the standard we need to do? And then the next group that comes in who don't have to figure it out. The standards are there. They just know they got to meet it or exceed it. Like Greg said, exceed it, which is what you hope people do. But there is a difference between that group that had to figure it out as they were doing it, and that next group that comes in where it's already been figured out and they just got to pick up on it and improve it. So that's a great observation, Chance. I really like that.
Thank you. Sean, you got any thoughts on it? Look at that. I'm making good observations. I love it.
We trust you, Chance. So, the reason I brought up that subject, or that little story about my pal and I down in California, is not to provide any earth-shattering new information about how trust works in the world. It's just a moment to add to the conversation that trust is a very complex thing. And not only is it complex in this moment right now, it'll be as complex but different complexity tomorrow. Trust is not a static point, I believe, in relationships. You might trust the pencil sharpener, and I mean the actual machine, the device, the pencil sharpener, not the human. You might not trust the human pencil sharpener, but you might trust the pencil sharpener device, because it's not going to change a lot. You establish trust with it, now it's done. Humans are different. You might trust the 12th pencil sharpener on a Tuesday, but not on Wednesday because they showed up hungover. And so trust is a complex subject, but it is also a dynamic subject. And so I bring this subject up through that story in California to say that both Marlon and I, our trust has flippity-flopped a number of times when he's in a position and then I'm in a different position, and then he's in a different position the following day. If your life is generally one-dimensional, and I'm using big terms now, like simplistic terms, if your life is one-dimensional, if it's spent in a cubicle and it's predictable and you don't have much adversity and maybe you are literally the pencil sharpener in your office, then trust is not a complex thing, perhaps. Maybe life is a bit simpler for that individual, perhaps. But in my world, and the kind of people that I hang out with, the world is dynamic. And so trust is complex and dynamic, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And interestingly enough, while you were talking, Sean, was the fact that also what you trust people with is dynamic in of itself, because there's lots of people that I would trust in the middle of a firefight. That would be fantastic. But I would not trust them with my kit once we get home, because they'll steal it. Right? Like then that is it gauges not only just person to person, but situation to situation, as we were saying earlier. I think it's a great point. Matt, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking about the Romans. I guess, well, maybe not Romans. I don't know. Dudes wearing red skirts and square looking shields. I think that is the Romans. That would be the
Romans. Yeah.
Yeah. They make these little formations. And I was thinking about how trust is such a powerful tool when you have an objective, when you know you've got trust, or at least to the degree that you can know, because then you can quit worrying about getting stuck, on the side or something, because your buddy's over there with a shield and you're focusing in one direction. And so instead of two people going after a task, but vulnerable from the back, each person is backed up, or you have a group of people making this turtle, um, it's a force multiplier, and you can just do so much more with that when you know you have it. And I guess that's the quandary, right? Some, like you said, there's people you'd trust in a firefight, but you wouldn't trust them at home because they steal your kit. So I guess the Romans had to deal with that. I think I remember hearing a story once that in Roman times, if a guy were to break that line and run ahead, even if what he did was great and successful, they'd have a party for him, but then he got killed because they couldn't trust him. They thought he was going to hold the line with them, and he broke out, did his own thing, and yeah, it turned out good, but we can't use you anymore because we can't trust you. And they took that very serious, had life or death consequences. Well, trust still does, right? It always will. Trust is right there with the life and death. You're climbing a mountain. You trust your rope. Have you checked it? Have you done your maintenance on it? If that rope breaks, it's not all the rope's fault if you left it out in the hot sun baking all the time. It's just a dynamic thing. And my mind is all over the place as you guys are talking. I'm just kind of following along here. If I get a little nugget, I jump in. But the Romans jumped in my mind because they definitely had to trust one another.
I love that. One of the things they taught me when I was doing my mountain ops course was like, trust your gear. Always trust your gear. Even when you start rappelling at the very beginning, trust your Swiss seat. Like, you have to trust the gear that you did it right. Otherwise, you're not going to go off the wall. You're not going to go up the mountain. You're not going to be able to do any of the objectives. Craig, I saw you got a thought. What do you got?
I kind of lost my train of thought there. Thinking about the trust your gear thing. I think it ties back to that. Can I rely on myself, or can I figure this out once I get there question? Like, you have to check all the boxes to make sure that your yes answer to that question is valid. But then once it's time to go, like, you can't get caught up in second guessing yourself and worrying if your gear is going to fail or anything like that. Like, you have to be ready to just fully focus forward and do what you got to do.
I love that. I was talking with my kids at the table the other night, and I don't know how we got to it, but I brought up the fact. It was like, oh yeah, that looks like kind of like a Spartan helmet. And both my boys were like, what's a Spartan helmet? And I was like, oh, it looks like this. And I started describing it to them. They're like, what's a Spartan? And I'm like, starting to get into the history of it. And then they're like, well, why are the shields so big? And we started going down that rabbit hole of, the shields covering from knee to neck of the man beside them. And that this whole story, I went into the whole story of the humpback coming into the Thermopylae, and like, I went down a rabbit hole with them. But what eventually I got to was that even in a line, even in the phalanx, the person on the right, the far right flank, is your strongest, best warrior, the man that's not going to break. It was usually the captain of the line, right? That's why senior NCOs march to the right of the line when you're in ranks. It's based on the fact that that person will not break. So the trust has to be the whole line. Doesn't matter whether one person steps out in the ranks or not, but everything is banked on that one guy on the right. And I'm wondering, we just kind of touched on this earlier about like losing trust or breaking trust or trying to rebuild it afterwards. If you yourself are that man in the line for your own self, for your own life, and you break trust, if you run from the field of battle, or you don't hold your line when you need to, how do you rebuild that? Where do you start with re-engaging trust after a failure? Oak, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Okay. I think first and foremost, you got to take responsibility. Somebody on here earlier, I think it was Matt, said, look, we all make mistakes. We're all going to do something that we regret, that we may even be ashamed of. But if you take responsibility, then you're starting that road of recovery. I had a boss who retired, a 4-star general, and he said, Oak, I don't care if you made a mistake today. I care about what did you do after the mistake. Did you try to hide it? Did you blame somebody else? Or did you walk up to me and say, hey, boss, I screwed up, and this is how I'm going to fix it? So I think the first step is you got to take the responsibility for your whatever you did that broke that trust. And then you just got to start from scratch and start rebuilding by your actions, not your words, your actions and your interactions with everybody else. And it's tough. It's a long road back to build trust once it's broken.
I can't even think of how many times I've screwed up. Matt, what are you thinking?
Yeah. How many times I screwed up? Wow. I'd say, yeah, you got to own it, and you show back up. And if they'll have you, you keep marching on. And I've seen it from both sides, right? So when I can tell that somebody's dropped the ball and they come back and they're apologetic and they understand, hey, this is what happened, and I'm aware of that. I'm like, okay, we got something we can work with. But if people are always pointing the finger in the other direction, it's that's not a good start, because I think it's like they're not awake, right? And there's times in my life where people have woken me up and I'm like, wow, I was asleep that whole time. Like, really wasn't aware. You know, I've been on the side of building. I've been the new guy before, where you got to build trust. And I inadvertently built trust because of what I was thinking about. It wasn't building trust. It was doing my job. And I remember I was on the island of Vieques, and we were was doing UXO work. And UXO world gets a lot of crazy characters, man. I mean, big time cowboys, a lot of EOD guys in there. And I had just come from the corporate world of Schlumberger, where my future was looking like khaki pants and a tucked in shirt with a big cell phone on my hip. And you get fired for looking crooked there. I mean, everything was just straight lace, squared away. You know, you had the whole corporate watching your emails. Oh, that's a little bit too political, whatever. And oh my gosh, man, just an eye on you, right? Well, I got out of that. It was never I failed that. There you go. I failed. And so I left that and I went to work in Vieques, and I had come from that experience, right? And so, do I trust this career? Is it going to turn out like the last one? And all I could think of was just do my job. 4:00 in the morning, we wake up, they give me a weed eater, and I was just cutting brush off of top of bombs and artillery shells. It was like heaven, man. It was bombs everywhere. And so I'm just weed eating and cutting all this grass away and looking at these bombs and just soaking it in that I was there and just doing my job. Like, as soon as somebody needed something, just go do it. And about 3 months went by, and my boss called me in on a Saturday, and he goes, hey, I need you to bring these files up to the office. So I drive in, I deliver them. I turn around, walking out. I got out his door, and he goes, hey, come back. So I went back in there. He said, I'll never forget this poor guy, because he had to run that whole site full of cowboys that were just awful. And he said, I just want to thank you. I said, for what? He goes, I don't know your name. He said, you just show up, and you do your job, and you go home. He said, you're not burning the furniture. You're not shooting the neighbor's dogs. There's not like 15 women calling the camp looking for you. He said, you haven't wrecked any company cars, and that's all experiences he had to deal with on top of his normal job. And so it didn't take too long before he got known as the golden child, because he would give me jobs and put me in places that, maybe were preferential. But I got there because I just focused on doing my job. It was like, I have a job. It wasn't like, oh, I want to look good to him. Oh, I want to outshine my neighbor. It was like, no, I just came from somewhere. If you look crooked, you got fired. So do your job exactly as you're supposed to. And then I realized it was way more relaxed there. That's just a little story I got.
You describe pretty much every EOD guy I know. It's off the walls, going crazy. Craig, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I think that describes that consistently useful person profile that we were talking about. Like, it's not about like being super exceptional all the time. It's almost the absence of the negatives. Like, as Charlie Munger put it, consistently not stupid. And that's like one of the most important characteristics in people. And it's surprisingly rare. As far as the building trust thing, I was trying to divide it between like trust on a personal or social level, where someone's kind of violated a sense of morals or ethics, which I think is a lot harder to rebuild than like someone who's made a mistake on the job and can learn from it. Like, there's some business story, I cannot remember where it came from, where someone who was like well vetted but relatively new to a team made a mistake that cost the company like $2 million. And he went to his boss. He's like, well, I guess you're firing me now. And the guy's boss responded with, why would I do that? I just spent $2 million on your education. And seeing it as like an investment in the person to give them enough leeway to make and learn from mistakes, even when they're expensive, because that person is not going to repeat a mistake that's that expensive again. You know, they're going to become better being consistently not stupid. But what I've been struggling with, like thinking about, is if someone kind of violates like a personal or social expectation, like, you know, they said they're going to be there and they're not, something like that. And, you know, like you can no longer, like they violated that sense of trust, where it's not a technical mistake where they didn't know how to fill out the form right, or they didn't know how to do the thing, that they had a clear expectation of a behavior and they didn't do it. I'm not sure how you rebuild that. Like, it's a tough thing to do. I was trying to think of instances where I've experienced that. Like I've either violated someone's trust or experienced someone else violating. And I think in a lot of cases, I just stop trusting that person. Like I don't rely on them once I've seen them not be the right person, not when they're not capable of doing the right thing.
That's a really interesting realm to go down, and I want to dive down to. Sean, let's go down the rabbit hole. What do you think?
A couple of things. So I'm glad we're at this point, because it's kind of where my head was churning for a little bit now. The moment that Chance, you had said back in the day in the phalanx, the guy on the far right flank was the dude. He was the man. He was the guy that you could count on. Nowadays, okay, so back then that was called meritocracy. That was called, you had the skill set, you had the cojones, you had the juice, you were the man. It was a thing. Today, it kind of goes like this. Tallest on the right, shortest on the left in single rank size. That's actually a command. That is a drill command on the parade square. And what that means is the person who is now on the right is Chance, because he's the tallest dude. Like, he's called Big Bird for a reason. And so if he's the tallest person on the right flank, now meritocracy has been replaced with freaking height. Now the only thing you need to do is be tall, and you're the man. And so what we've done over a period of time is replaced the merit of the position with a simple DNA height expectation. And those are not the same things. And so the loose point I'm trying to make is meritocracy, or having the merit to be trustworthy, is a thing. But we have diluted it in our modern society to some degree by not relying on merit, but relying on other artificial metrics that should or could or may indicate the right person, but aren't categorically the right person. So tallest on the right, shortest on the left in single rank size. All that does is produce a tall person on the right flank, not the right person on the right flank. I hope that makes sense.
Makes sense to me. And I just a side note here is that every time I've been given that drill command, I've only ever had to move once. There's only ever one time I've been in a formation that I had to move. So that's just a bonus for me. Oak, what are you thinking on this?
Yeah, I think exactly like Greg was saying, you know, certainly a breach in value, morals, personal responsibility to somebody else is much different than if you just make a mistake, because we all make mistakes. The only perfect person that's ever walked this earth we nailed to a cross 2,000 years ago. So we're all going to make mistakes, but it's incumbent on leaders. You know, I always use the term leaders do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, even if it's not in your own best interest. And there are situations, we've probably all been in that situation where we had to do the right thing. It wasn't in our interest, but it was in the organization's interest, or somebody who we were leading was in their best interest. And you got to do that right thing, even if nobody's watching and nobody's checking up. They are watching and they are going to check up, but that's not why you do it.
Right.
Good leaders do the right thing. Good people do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And if you ever get caught not doing the right thing, not making a mistake, not doing the right thing, you're done. I agree with him. I don't know how you come back from that. You're not. I'm not letting you come back from that. I can just tell you that's not going to happen. So
this, I made a point earlier about micro consistencies and like being able to maintain those consistencies through life. And when you're talking about interpersonal relationships, I wonder how much of that has to do with trying to re-engage those micro consistencies. So there, as an example, there was a dude that I was overseas with, great guy while we were on tour, really good dude to have beside me. But the moment we got back in regiment, he was more than willing to throw me under the bus just for the sake of throwing me under the bus, like so that he could get, that little bit extra or whatever. That relationship is basically soured, right? I can't trust that guy anymore. But I wonder how much that applies to every other relationship that we get into now. Because if I were just to never trust people to that level ever again, I mean, I could still technically live my life, and I could have my really close circle that I maintain and never trust anybody outside of that ever again, which is, I think, one of the issues we see in the veteran community. But then what? Like, where do we go from there? Or how do we open ourselves up to that a little bit more? Matt, what are you thinking?
I guess, communication. Communication is one of those deep words. It means a lot more than just saying, hey, I'm hurting here or there. You hurt me. Why'd you do this? Communication, I think, is like the beginning of growth. If you are the one who did the wrong, I think the thing to do is communicate with the person to the best of your ability why you did, and be honest about it, and be honest with yourself. Why did you do that? If it was done to you, it's kind of interesting because you're in an interesting position at that point. I don't know if you ever heard it said, but is it worse to be the person who breaks someone's leg or the person who has the leg broken? And it's worse to be the person who breaks someone's leg. Like, I would rather you break my leg than me break your leg, because the leg will heal, but you were the kind of person that broke my leg. And I wouldn't want to be the kind of person that broke your leg. So if you broke my leg, I'd want to know why. But it's more of an opportunity for you as the leg breaker to grow and ask yourself, now, I never trust you again to the point where I'm going to put you in that position, but life goes on and you're going to live somewhere and you're going to, have a life. And if you're not willing to accept that you're the one who broke the leg and analyze the deep set issues as to why you would do that, that's not my responsibility. I'm just not going to trust you again. I'm not letting you back in that circle. In my job, obviously it's a safety thing. But even, relationship speaking. So it goes back to the responsibility. Oak said it. And I mean, sometimes so much can be said in such a simple thing, but if you're not going to reflect and be honest while you're doing the reflecting, what's the point? Say, how do you come back from that? I don't think, you don't. I mean, it's like getting toothpaste out of a toothpaste tube. I mean, you can try to get it back in there, but it ain't going to work too good. So it's an opportunity for growth on all sides. If you're the person that got hurt, you get to analyze, okay, what did I do to put myself in this situation? But then also ask them, why'd you do it? And if they're the one that, whoever the person is that did the betrayal, needs to be honest with themselves and say why. Otherwise, you just got to cut them loose and go, because they're not awake. They're not growing. They're not thinking. They're not being truthful with themselves. And they're just like a Pac-Man, just going and eating without reflection.
I really like the toothpaste analogy. That it got this image in my head of like, how would you get toothpaste back in a toothpaste tube? But interestingly enough, how you would do it, you would need a very small tool, and you would have to do it so microscopically, like you're taking little bits by little bits, and it would take a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of like personal time and sacrifice to get that to work. But I think that applies to trust, right? If I broke someone's trust horrifically. I cheated on my wife or something. The only way that I could ever even hope to regain that trust would be through really, really small actions over a long period of time just to get back to where I was. And
Very
even
long
then,
period.
and then you wouldn't even be that, because there would still be some on the counter. There would still, like, it would never be 100%. So I like that analogy. Craig, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, the toothpaste would be dirty, even if you get it back in there. I think, I mean, we talked about like learning to trust new people. Like you talked about the problem with the veteran community, that there are guys that just, I'm never going to trust anyone again who isn't someone who's from my unit from 20 years ago. And it's kind of a shitty way to live. I think you have to just slowly evaluate people and trust them with increasing amounts of responsibility or trust or whatever. Like, and as you go through that process, I think it's also important to keep in mind that it's on you if your trust is violated. If someone, like, if you place your trust in someone, you've made an assessment of their character and their capabilities that is based on your own thinking. And if they violate that trust, it's because you also miscalibrated, like you didn't evaluate them correctly. And part of any relationship is accepting the consequences of being wrong. Like, say your wife, like you're in a loving romantic relationship, to be present and engaged in that relationship, you have to accept all of the potential consequences of trusting that person with your heart, of accepting that that person has full permission to destroy you if they want to. And if they do, it's on you. Like, you chose to give them permission to hurt you. And there's only a limited number of people that you give that permission to, but you do so based on your own rational assessment of their character and capabilities. So that's, when it comes to trust, that's always one of the things that I've thought of. Like, even if a person doesn't live up to what I expected that they would, that's still kind of on me, because I made the decision. Like, I put those standards on them in my head. I decided that they would be this person in the future. That's what I'd predict of their behavior, and I was wrong. And so I don't really blame them. I blame myself for assessing poorly.
Yeah, I like that. You know, that's a Stoic thing. Says you don't have, what does it say? You don't have like choice of outside events, only how you respond to them. I mean, that's really good, because life happens, right? And the only thing you really can do is how you're going to respond.
This is Oak. You said this earlier, right at the beginning. When people give you that trust, it's yours to lose. And I think that's such a great point in what we're talking about, especially interpersonal relationships. When I'm giving you my trust, I'm giving it to you for you to lose. And I have to take responsibility for that. I have to fully accept that that's what's going to happen. I really like this.
Well, and on the flip side of that is that when you do that, then who was it said, you know, you have a part in that as well. That you got to nurture that relationship, whether it's a friend or your wife or your husband or whatever it is. You got a part in that too. And if that trust is breached, then again, step back and say, did I play a part in that? Was I responsible for that in some way as well? I may not have been the one who did the act, but did I drive it that way? Or did I allow that to happen because of my actions? So, you know, personal responsibility is a huge thing, and we got to be willing to take that responsibility and always be looking at how we can make ourselves better. Always, you know, I'm a big believer in reflection, and I tell people all the time, if you add daily reflection to your personal life every day, that's the last thing I do before I go to bed every night. What was I supposed to do? What did I do? How can I get better at it? If you do that every single day and you're honest with yourself, you will change your life. I promise.
That's how you build personal trust too, like within yourself. If you can sit and reflect on your own actions and honestly say, this is what I've done, this is how I want to get better, give yourself a plan and then work towards that plan. I think that's how you eventually can lead. It leads to you being able to trust your own decisions later on in life, especially when you get into it at a young age. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. Just that there is some interesting points being made in respect to, do you trust someone with your heart? Do you trust someone to complete the mission? do you trust someone to ... Trust is a very interesting thing that is very personal at times, and sometimes is almost corporate. Complete the mission, as it were. And so those two different kinds of trusts, as the example, have perhaps more spirit in them. And so maybe more soulful, I'll call it. When you're working on a trustful relationship with a close personal friend, there's more spirit, more soul in it than if someone is relying on you to complete the mission. Now it's almost clinical, if you will. So the difference between a clinical trust and a soulful trust, I think, can create various levels of disappointment from the other person. If you trust them with your heart and they disappoint you, now it's a big disappointment versus the mission wasn't perfect. Those are interesting thoughts to me. Second thing I'll say is that when someone breaches your trust, when someone breaks their trust with me because they did something that was outrageous, well, in that case, you can work to maybe rebuild it or take advantage of the other billions of people on the planet that you can then work with. Because you can spend your entire life trying to rebuild a trust relationship, or you can just move on to the next person and see how that trust relationship is going to play out. If someone breaches your trust, I find it quite easy to look to the left and right and choose the next person that I'm going to trust, if that makes sense.
100%. This is a really big conversation, and I mean, like everybody's been saying, we've been hitting points all over the place. But I think at the very root of it is that it takes actual thought. You can't just go through your life. I don't think. Well, some people can, but go through your life and never have to analyze your own systems of trust. You have to be able to ask these questions of yourself, and you have to be able to ask questions of the people around you, because that's what these discussions are for, so that we can all get better on this stuff. And I just want to say thank you guys, Matt, Craig, Oak, Sean. This has been an awesome conversation. We're almost at 2 hours here, so I want to get some final thoughts before we shut her down for the afternoon. So, Oak, I'm going to put you up first. Anything still bubbling on the back of that brain there?
No, I think that, and we've all kind of hit it today, but it's a never-ending thing. It's constant that you have to evaluate the trust, and you have to continue to earn the trust. Just because I earn your trust today doesn't mean I'm going to have it 2 days from now, unless I do the right things and continue to earn that trust, because you can lose it just much quicker than you can establish it.
Yeah, it takes a second to lose it, and I love that you got to earn it every day, 100%. Craig, any final thoughts?
I've always sucked at conclusions. I think Oak's thing that you have to earn trust every day is probably the best wrap up.
Bam, I like it. Matt, how about yourself?
I was just thinking of it from a practical stance, like a vehicle. You say, okay, it's yours to lose. Well, it's yours to keep too. When I drive my truck, I don't think about all that stuff in there. I'm trusting it, and I head out to the Great West looking for hot springs. But if that truck starts to glitch and little things start to happen and it's not quite acting right, I start kind of watching that, right? So as you go through life, you kind of think about it like a truck. And while you are a truck yourself to somebody else, there are trucks around you. I think it's important to think of it as a tool. It's a force multiplier. You're a force for someone, and there are people around you. And as you cultivate that culture of trust around you, you become more powerful. Your goals become more achievable, but it takes work every day, right? It takes work of you earning trust by doing your job, not trying to just earn trust, but to do what you're supposed to do, the right thing every day. You're reflecting and you're growing, and then encouraging those around you to do the same thing.
I love it. Sean, any final thoughts?
My final thought is this, that I believe trust is to some degree a force of nature, just like we're a force of nature. And if you look at yourself as such, if you look at trust as not just a tool, but a force to play with, once you realize that it is a thing, a dynamic thing, it's a today thing, it's a tomorrow thing, it was a yesterday thing, trust is a malleable, real, ever-evolving thing. If you want to get good at it, if you want to be trustworthy, if you want to be a force of nature, it's something that you have to actively engage in. It's something that you actively shape. You don't sit back with your feet up on the table and believe that trust is just going to show up. What you've got to do is you've got to go out there and make it happen. Not make people trust you. Make it undeniable that the pattern that you represent is trustworthy.
Man, the pattern you represent. I love that. I don't have much to add. Just the fact that it's a skill set like anything else, and it takes practice and it takes work and it takes effort to develop and use well throughout your life. And I mean, I just want to also mention and say thanks to all the people that are watching, that are commenting. Some great comments coming out of today, and some really awesome discussion going on the Instagram side. People have been chatting with each other. It's awesome to see. Keep it up. Other than that, as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week. Chimo.
Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all next time.